Hi, thanks for joining me in the Everything and Anything at a Bit Gay podcast. Today I have Scott Terry on my podcast, who is an author. He has one book out that just got reprinted for a second time. And then you have another book coming out in February called,
That's right.
okay. You want to tell us about your first book and then maybe give me a little summary of what your second book will be about?
Sure. The first book, the memoir, is people tell me brave story to write. I guess that's true. I don't think a lot of people write stories like, well, actually, that's not true. It's the kind of story people write books about. I had that kind of a childhood. So that book was published in 2012, and then it was out of print for about the last 5 years. And then a new publisher picked it up, same publisher that then picked up the second book that comes out in February. The second book is fiction, and which is kind of fun because it
Yeah.
lets me tell a story differently than the memoir. I felt really constrained on how I had to write it. It had to be true. Even though I had lots of agents and publishers pushing me to fictionalize it. And I said, this story doesn't need to be fictionalized. It's interesting enough. It doesn't, I don't want to tell it that way. I want it to be true and honest. And
What did you enjoy more, writing the memoir or the fiction?
the same, I think. Both of them just sort of feel like, I think the way I would describe it is that if you are a writer, you have to write.
Yeah.
Like if you're a musician, you have to play music. If you're an artist, you have to create art. It's that sort of thing I discovered. But I think I feel more satisfied or more gratification out of the second book because the memoir, the story is told to me and I
Yeah.
just have to write it in a way that is hopefully well written. But fiction is, I'm inventing it out of the blue, even though it's really similar to the memoir. I had a lot of publishers and agents who were pushing me to write fiction. And so it kind of started with some similarities
Uh-huh.
to my story in the memoir, but it didn't end up being that way.
Just so everybody knows, we'll say this again at the end of the podcast, but the name of Scott's first book that came out originally in 2012 is called Cowboys, Armageddon, and the Truth: How a Gay Child Was Saved from Religion. So I want to jump into that and just kind of talk about your childhood, first of all. So you grew up in a rural area, we'll call it, and you were a Jehovah Witness as what your family was. And tell me about your childhood, like where you grew up, how your father treated you, and kinda go through that with me.
My mother divorced my dad when I was 2
Okay.
and disappeared. My sister was 4. And then my dad was in a really rough spot in life and he joined the Jehovah's Witnesses. It made sense to him. The Jehovah's Witnesses give answers to people who have difficult
Mhm.
places in life. It's the easy, here's all you need to know about Armageddon's going to come soon. And
Okay.
if you join us. And so,
Is it
um,
normal for people to join it? Or I feel like people are, like, born into it, so that's a unique is that unique for somebody to join it looking
it
for this?
is, it is because that's their mantra is to go out and constantly be looking for new
Mhm.
people. They're out hunting for new members. And essentially they hunt for the down and out. They don't go look for happy, successful people
Mhm.
because happy, successful people
Yeah.
enjoy the joy. They look for somebody who's got a tough story. They're they're on drugs. They're a single mother. It's or my dad, single father, 2 little kids.
Mhm.
It the people who feel like they have no choices fall for it.
Do you know where your mother is now?
I do.
Okay.
It's a different. My mom was not a person who was meant to be a mom.
Okay.
He had my sister when she was 17. She has no motherly instinct. She disappeared. I didn't see her. I didn't develop a relationship with her until I was an adult. So it's a really limited relationship. It's not a typical mother son. It's more like we know each other. And
Yeah. So tell me about your childhood with your father. What type of father was he?
he wasn't a father who didn't want to be a father. He was a father because that's the result of being sexually active with a woman you marry. So
Yeah.
he was just interested and he had a job. He had all of the requirements, which is really time consuming for a Jehovah's Witness. He became an elder, which really puts a lot of
Mhm.
time constraints on him. And horses and hunting. That's all that mattered. He really didn't want to be a father. And then in hindsight, and I probably even knew it as a kid, that all he really cared about was keeping his wife, Fluffy, happy, which was impossible.
Yeah.
He just was not the person who would be happy. She was the wicked stepmother who did not want his two children. He married her when I was 4, and I didn't know anything else from the age of 4. Suddenly she's there and I'm told to call her mom, and I'm not allowed in her house unless she's home. I can't touch her TV. I can't touch anything in the way of food. Everything was doled out, limited, restricted. What we could read as Jehovah's Witnesses was controlled. What we could watch on TV was controlled. Everything was so controlled as a kid. And of course, me being 4, that's just what I was raised with. I didn't know anything else. I didn't leave until I was 16 when I ran away from home.
And so when you were 16, you went to go to Northern California? Is that where you went to
Yeah.
go live with your aunt?
Yeah. Yeah. Before that, we had been in Wyoming, and then we were living in Cedar City, Utah. We were there for a year. That's where I ran away. And when I ran away, it was essentially I don't know anything, but I know I can't live here
Yeah.
anymore. And so I ran away and I called the police for help. It wasn't until the next day. I spent the night behind an apartment complex sleeping, and the next morning I woke up like I have no choices. So I called the police, and that was its own nerve-wracking experience. But the police, the, the juvenile officer there in that was in St. George's, he was wonderful, and he connected me with my aunt, who I hadn't seen in 6 to 7 years. Last time I'd seen her when I was 9 or 10. So I didn't really know her, but
Yeah.
I had this wonderful aunt who stepped up and took me in, and everything I am as an adult, I think I owe to her.
That's awesome. And so your father was abusive to you as you were growing up?
Yeah, he was funny. He was, and that we had multiple times of police showing up on our doorstep asking why we have bruises all over us. So yeah, he was abusive, but I don't come to think of it that way when I think of him. I think of him as being so weak-willed
Mhm.
that he just simply did what my stepmother instructed. So when my stepmother decided that I shouldn't have real milk, I should have powdered milk, he signed up as a little kid. I'm 6, 7, 8 years old, and there's real milk in the fridge for the two of them, and
Mhm.
there's powdered milk for me and my sister. And it
It's
didn't
crazy.
occur to him that he would step up and say, that's not how I want to treat my son or my daughter. He just had no backbone. It,
And did your sister stay living with him when you left? Because she was 2 years old, she was 18 when you left?
no, so he would have been 18, but he left when he was 13.
Oh, wow.
He had memories of our mom. So my mom disappeared when my sister was 4. I had no memories of her. My sister did. So for her, it was always you and I would talk about it, where he would promise me that our mom was going to come and save us from Fluffy. And he just had this hope that that was going to happen. And so when the day came when he said, it was a Friday, when he said, I want out, I'm done. It took my dad that day to call my mom. I don't know how he found her, but he found her. He came to pick us up on Sunday, or pick up my sister on Sunday. It happened
Mhm.
to be just by chance, was my 12th birthday, April 4th, 1964, 74, 70. And mom came and picked up my sister and drove off and didn't say boo to me. It,
Really?
yeah, not a word. No, not a thing. And so
So
my
she was
sister
forced to
got
be
out.
a mom to your sister, basically?
Yeah, yeah. And even, I didn't know it because I had 4 years before I got out at 16. I had no contact with them, so I didn't know what my sister's life was like. My mom wasn't reaching out to me, so I didn't know anything. But once I got out, I realized, there were some people who just aren't meant to be parents,
Yeah.
and that would have been my mom. Not abusive, just
Yeah.
not a parent.
No maternal instincts.
Yeah, none.
So tell me about whenever you went to go live with your aunt, and well, actually before that, I want to talk about when you started discovering what your sexuality was. Like, what age were you when you started realizing, I'm not into girls or women."
I knew that early. I just didn't know what it meant. I would say that I knew I was gay when I was 7.
Okay.
And had no idea what it meant. And the best example I can give is we had moved to a subdivision, all new house, and I was 7. And I just happened to be down the street. I was going to the grocery store for Fluffy. And I walked back, and there was a guy pouring concrete at a step. I still remember the house right at the corner of Wildman, and I forget what the intersection was, but in Fillmore, California. And he was a big blonde guy with the shirt off and his pants hanging halfway around his butt. And I stopped and stared. And I had no idea what that meant, what to
Yeah.
do with it. Didn't have a word for it. But I went home, and I think 10 minutes later, I went back to see him again. Just,
Yeah.
again, no concept of what that meant. So I think most people who are gay know before, although it's funny, my husband didn't. My husband didn't really figure it out till he was later. Some people are a little slower than others. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I think I think people know, they just try to, like, I think for me, what I did is I tried to deny and pretend it wasn't real.
yeah. Yeah. I didn't do that. I was really clear. I knew what it was I liked. I knew I wasn't interested in girls. But the Jehovah's Witnesses at that time in 1976, they published a book that we called the Youth Book. There was an entire chapter devoted to masturbation and homosexuality. And that was their
It's
claim.
bad.
Yeah. Well, and that's what causes homosexuality.
Oh,
Pervasive.
masturbation does.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
I'd never heard that though. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Their pitch was that you get bored and you get bored of playing with yourself. And so you go looking for somebody else and you find yourself in home. And even though that didn't make any sense to me when I was 12, when they published that. But I, there was another chapter about puberty. And I read that and I thought, that's what it is. I just got to wait for the puberty thing to happen. It'll be like 18, puberty will finally hit and I'll suddenly be attracted to girls instead of boys.
Yeah.
And of course, by the time I was 16, I knew that wasn't happening. But at 12, that's like, okay, puberty, that's the word.
Yeah.
Magic, right?
And why is I interviewed someone else who was a Jehovah Witness a couple months ago. What is your take on why it's and her take was is that it's very cultish. It's like a
Yeah.
cult.
Yeah.
So tell me what
Mm.
your take on the whole Jehovah Witness religion is.
I would use the word cult. And the reason why is because there's no freedom in thought or expression. And it is the two things that I think define it as a cult is number one, me, one of the defining characteristics of being in a cult is that you usually don't know you're in one until you get out.
Mhm.
And then you get out and you look back and think, what was I thinking? It's just, now that I have some clarity. But the primary thing is that there's, there's a price to pay when you leave. That to me is what defines it as a cult. If you don't have the free will to just say, I don't believe this anymore, but I'd
Mhm.
still like to go have dinner with my sister or my parents. That's not the case. If you were baptized as a witness and you leave, you can't be anything worse in their eyes. You are then considered an apostate. They are no longer allowed to talk to you, to socialize with you. Even if you didn't leave for any wrongdoing, you just found your brain and got out, you're now ostracized. That to me is what makes it a cult more than anything.
Yeah. And so you go to your aunt's house, you're living there, you're 16 years old, much happier. Your aunt sounds like a much better person than what your father and
Wonderful,
mother were.
wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
And you were upstate. So you were living on a farm, I guess, or you had horses and
We had horses in an arena and rope cows. My aunt was a rancher, uh, primarily a real estate broker, but he had cattle. My cousins were rodeoing at the time. They were kids. They were younger than me. Her husband was a bull rider. He was at the very first national finals as a bull rider in 1949, which is at Madison Square Garden.
wow.
Um, it was just, and I came from horses. That
Yeah.
we had horses as a kid. My grandfather was a rancher, a poor rancher. That's just what we did. Being a rural guy was our life. It was if we ate meat, it was something we probably killed, and generally that was deer, elk.
Mm.
Just how we live, like lots of rural people.
Yeah.
Um, so it's normal life.
So your uncle basically is the one that got you kind of, and I
Yep.
guess your cousins as well, kind of got you into, he's a bull rider. Your cousins were in the rodeo, so that's kind of what got you to go into that.
It, it was no question that if you are in a rural ag cowboy family,
Hmm.
that's what you do.
Yeah.
There would have, I don't know, they would have been horrified if I had said, no, I'm not interested in that. I want to, I can't think of any alternative, but it just made sense to me. They said, hey, you should ride bulls. And I'm like, okay, sure.
And when did you when did you kind of tell yourself, and you said you kind of knew when you were 7 that you were gay, but when did you kind of admit it to yourself? And did you tell
Yeah.
your aunt?
I did not tell my aunt. I was still as closeted as could be.
Okay.
So when I told myself when I uttered those words, "You're gay," was when I was 16 in Las Vegas, Nevada. We were there for a Jehovah's Witness assembly, I think. And we'd gone to see a film that was, I can't remember the name of it now. It had John Connery in it. It was a railroad, I forget. But anyway, John Connery's in that movie with his shirt off in bed. And there's a woman in the room that, of course, Connery has to
Yeah.
have romance with. And he was dressed in about nothing, and he had his shirt off. And I was as clear as could be that John Connery with his shirt off was the most exciting thing out of that movie I could imagine. The Great Train Robbery, I think is what that movie was. So I remember walking out of that theater. It was the first time I'd ever been allowed to see a PG movie. Actually, that's true. We saw the Cowboy once, and then my dad was 4 saw that movie. It's, again, we're watching G movies. I'm 16.
Yeah.
We're only allowed to watch something rated G. I walked out of the theater with my dad and Fluffy and my step siblings, and I said, "You're gay," to me. And one thing I think is important is I didn't necessarily feel bad about it. It was really clear to me that I didn't choose this. This is not something I decided. It is.
Yeah.
But the part that I had a time with is, especially after I got to my aunt's and I'm riding balls and I'm a deer hunter, and it was not the picture that I had been given of people who are gay.
Yeah. That's why I think, you're
anomaly.
Yeah, exactly. You are. I mean, you don't see a lot of gay men today, at least, I mean, I live in Boston, so you don't see a lot of gay men going out and hunting and riding bull and doing that. Like, I think that you are an anomaly in that aspect.
Actually, I don't think so now. At that time I did. And that was what made it such a struggle was I was just so sure I'm the only one. I didn't think there was anybody else. And of course there was no internet.
Yeah.
So I thought there was something wrong with me that way. It's like, yeah, I'm a weird gay guy because there's nobody like me. All gay guys that I had been told, they all wear dresses. They all live in San
Oh, yeah.
Francisco
Yes. Yeah.
for Hollywood. It's like, there's not me. And now I don't feel that. Now it's particularly after I found the Gay Rodeo Association and I showed up there and
Yeah. So tell me about that, how you discovered that and how that kind of changed your view.
so when I was in Montana, oh boy, this is a long story. I was in Montana. I was 20 and I went to an adult bookstore sort of by accident. I didn't go there for that, but I was in this little tiny town in eastern Montana and I went to Billings, which was the only city.
Yeah.
It's a 4-hour drive away. I went there to go to an optometrist, saw an adult bookstore, and I thought, I got to go in there because I want to see what a naked guy looks like. I'm 20. I'm horny. I'm going to
Yeah.
go look. And so I went in and I bought an Advocate magazine. And the Advocate did nothing for me. None of the stories, they just reinforced that I'm the only gay guy like me.
Yeah.
None of it. But the Advocate at that time had a block of personal ads at the back, organized by state. There were none from guys in Montana or Wyoming, where I was from, but I thought, how it works. That's how I find out if there's another gay guy like me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ran an ad. It scared the heck out of me to do it. When I ran the ad, I got one call from a guy who was a rancher in North Dakota. He was older than me. I was 20. He was probably in his 30s, I think.
Okay.
He lived on the ranch with his mom and dad, his brother, sister, their kid. He called me a couple times at midnight, and neither of us knew anything. I mean, I didn't know. I had no clue.
So you had no gay experiences at all at this point at 20 years old?
I had two that were, one of them was actually a guy that I had met at that bookstore in Billings.
Okay.
And he's actually the one who connected me with the guy. Well, another guy I haven't mentioned yet. But anyway, so I ran that ad from the Advocate. He was the only guy that called me. He was a rancher. I called him once, not at midnight. I think I called him at dinner time, and he backpedaled really hard. He basically said, well, I must have been drinking. I don't know what he's talking about. And so for me, that was like, all right, so there's one other gay guy like me. He's in North Dakota. He's an hour away, but he can only be gay if he's drunk.
Yeah.
So I'm out. And so I went back to the bookstore and met a guy there. He actually was from Graybull, Wyoming. I hadn't told this story. You're going to be the first time I've told this story.
Okay. Good. I got the exclusive.
Yeah. Older guy wearing a toupee. He was a smoker. Nothing attractive about him at all, except that he was the only guy that I ever thought, okay, I actually get to see what a penis is like.
Yeah.
So anyway, I hooked up with him in a hotel there. he then introduced me to a guy that came from the town where I was living.
Oh,
Um, and so I met this guy that had come from the town where I was living. He lived in Billings. He came all the way back to the town where I was to see his parents and came to see me. He spent a half hour in my basement apartment. And again, I knew nothing. He knew a whole lot more than I did. Yeah, I didn't know anything. But one of the things that he said was the reason he had left the town was because he was absolutely sure that he would either be killed if they discovered he was gay,
mm,
or his parents' house would be burned. It put the fear of God in me. And I knew it already anyway. I
mm,
knew that you can't be gay in this little town. And you especially can't be gay if you're me, who is gay in a way that not everybody knows. Something's wrong with me.
mhm.
I don't know. So it was just really clear. I need to get out of this town. So at 21, I moved to California.
Okay.
And in the process, after I got to California, it was a long process there. I detail that in my book. But I ended up meeting a couple from San Francisco, nicest guys in the world. They introduced me to the gay rodeo.
Okay.
When I was in Montana, I had seen a mention of gay rodeos in a magazine. I think it was Mother Earth News. It was just a little story about a gay rodeo in Reno, which just blew my mind. And to me, I just assumed that if there's a gay rodeo in Reno, there's probably like 5 or 6 guys. That's it. Because there's not a lot of it.
Yeah.
And, they come from all over the country, and it's a big secret. You can't tell anybody. Scared the bejesus out of me. But I sent them a letter to the address they had in Reno. I somehow found it, sent a letter, didn't get a response. But then when I moved to California and met these 2 guys in San Francisco, they had met somebody that was riding in the gay rodeos that they thought would make a good boyfriend for me. And he did, actually, but they wanted me to meet with them. So I went to the gay rodeo in Phoenix. That was my first. And that was just mind blowing.
Yeah. It was your whole world expanded at that point where you're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
there are people like me.
Yes. 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 And gay rodeo is really welcoming. So
Yeah.
fair enough. There's lots of guys that are big girls.
Yeah.
They're drag queens, but there's also guys like me. And it's sort of what changed the universe for me on I'm not alone. There's a lot of me. And being gay isn't so black and white.
Yeah.
There's a huge spectrum. I couldn't overstate how important my time in the gay rodeo association was for me. It, it's like going to live with my aunt. Changed
Yeah.
my perspective on the world. Going to the gay rodeo, same thing.
Just to go back to when you were talking about the guy that you met, and he said he had to get out of town because he felt like he'd be murdered or his family's house would be burned down. Did you ever feel kind of threatened or scared by that yourself? Did you ever feel like,
Oh
I
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if the wrong person in a state like, and maybe I'm being very stereotypical, but like Montana finds out you're gay, you know,
Oh yeah.
you could
Yeah.
end up really getting you could be the
Yeah.
Matthew Shepard in a way.
Yeah. 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 That was an overriding thought always, that if the people in this town know I'm gay,
Mhm.
I'm in trouble. There was no, there was, in fact, there was even, I, I haven't told this story a lot either, but there was a guy that came to town, a hairdresser,
Mhm.
that came to town and opened up a salon in a main drag. Salon's not the right word, just a tiny little town. And he opened up, and to me, it seemed like he never had customers. And so I went in once to get a haircut. There was nobody else there, woman being, and it took me 2 minutes to tell myself this guy, and it scared the heck out of me.
How old were you then?
I would have been 20,
Okay.
21. So, but all I could think about was I wasn't attracted. It wasn't there's another gay guy. I was just thinking about what if somebody sees me walking out of here? If
Yeah.
people I work with see me in this shop all by myself with this guy that I think everybody else is going to know he's gay too. That was scary. And he disappeared in about 6 months. He lasted 6 months and vanished. And I've always just assumed that he left because he realized he couldn't live in that place either.
Yeah. So so you start the gay rodeo circuit, right? And you end up meeting obviously a lot of people that you have more in common with than you would think you were meeting before. One thing I do want to go back before you talk about that. You were in San Francisco, and how did you like living in a big city like that?
So when I first came to California, I went to Pico State. I
Okay.
had an aunt in Pico who convinced me to leave Montana. That was a lot of it too. I had this aunt saying, "Here's this place for you." So
Mhm.
I came to California, went to Pico, and in the process, I visited San Francisco once, and I thought, "This is the coolest thing ever."
Yeah.
It's so not little town in eastern Wyoming or Montana. It's just San Francisco.
Yeah.
And so when I graduated from school, I decided that's where I was going to work, and where I was going to start my business career and profession. And I was going to move to San Francisco. And I did. And I lasted about 6 months. And I said, this is the craziest place in the world.
Yeah.
I can't live here. It's like, nope. And not it.
Just too fast paced and just too insane with everything happening.
Everything, the ability to park,
Yeah.
or the fear that everywhere you park, your vehicle might get broken into,
Mm.
or the ability to find a grocery store and find a place to park to go there. It just wasn't. And the Castro was one of those things that another kind of life changing, defining moment where I went to the Castro and I thought, and the first time I went there, I had been told everybody you see there is gay. And I went, oh, top, like 10% of these people, they can't all. And once I realized that, yeah, they really are, it became this really neat thing to think this exists, that there's this place that people can go who are gay and still welcome and feel at home. But I didn't feel at home there. I felt like I'm going to visit once in a while, but I'm not the guy who would live here. That's just not me.
What about in LA or New York City? Did you ever go there? Was that completely mind blowing? If you did,
I've been to LA, New York City, but I'm so not a bar guy
Mhm.
that, and I'm not it just doesn't, like I've been to New York City many times. I've never been to a gay bar there. It's just not part of my life. And I don't know.
Well,
I
just
don't,
like just how intense it is in New York City
oh,
compared
yeah,
to
yeah,
living where you grew up and
yeah,
living in
yeah, 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 yeah,
Montana and
yeah,
even
yeah,
compared to San Francisco, it's so
yeah,
intense.
yeah. But it's cool because I'm there visiting.
Yeah.
So it that's a neat thing. I like cities to go visit and stay in
Yeah.
a cool hotel and go up. I mean, that's neat. And I think New York is just awesome. LA, not so much. LA doesn't have the feel of New York.
Yeah.
New
It
York is this condensed. LA is sprawl.
yeah.
And I don't, yeah, when I'm in LA, I don't think, well, this is great. Let's
Yeah.
do a week vacation as opposed to New York is just neat. So, but it's not me, but I can appreciate that there's some pretty neat things about
Yeah.
urban cities. And
And so how long were you in how long and, like, how did you was the gay rodeo kind of like was that what you ended up doing as your career once you kind of
no,
discovered it? No, okay. This
no,
was
no.
just something that you just enjoy doing and
Yeah,
meeting people.
yeah, yeah. Gay rodeo is amateur. So
Okay.
it's one of those things that if it's no different than if you played football in high school.
Mhm.
When you get out of high school, well, maybe you're good enough to ride in college. But after college, if you're not pro, there's no place to go play football, really.
Yeah.
Um, and rodeo is kind of the same, that unless you can find an amateur association, there's not a whole lot of options. Roping is a little different. Team roping exists everywhere. There's lots of team roping, but that's not a rodeo per se. So the gay rodeo was a way to just continue something that I really liked in an amateur environment, which
Mhm.
was fun. It, if you, so one of the things that the gay rodeo had was you don't just have to be a bull rider. You can also be a steer rider. Steers are smaller than bulls. They're castrated. For somebody who came from a bull riding background, riding steers was easy.
Mm.
It's not so challenging as opposed to someone who had never done it. Maybe that's challenging, but there's not a lot of amateur rodeo associations that let guys ride steers. That was fun. It,
Yeah.
it was neat, but there came a point when I sort of felt like, all right, I've done this. I don't feel a need to compete anymore. My brain sort of clicked on in terms of bull riding, and I thought it's kind of stupid. In fact, that I remember the very last bull ride that I had. It was in Denver at a gay rodeo in Denver. I drew a bull on Saturday. He bucked me off. I thought he couldn't have bucked me off. And on Sunday, by chance, I drew the same bull. And I did all of the normal conversations you do in a competition. You tell yourself, all right, this is my second shot at him. I'll do it this time. And a guy drew him same bull in the morning in the slack and bucked off and broke his leg.
Oh,
And then it came time for me to get on. And I just said, I don't want to get on. And that was my last time. As soon as that moment arrived in a sport like that, you're done.
yeah.
It
I mean,
was,
you could have saved your life that day.
yeah, I never think of it that way. I never got hurt that bad on riding bulls or roughstock at all. All my injuries were from roping or getting kicked by a horse or something.
Yeah.
But it was just sort of the way I describe bull riding to people who want to know what it's like is I tell them bull riding is not a physical sport in the way that, I mean, it is obviously, but
Yeah.
it's less of a physical sport than it is a mental sport. Bull riding is a sport you have to be able to turn your brain off or rewire it so that don't think this is the stupidest thing you've ever done. Because
Mhm.
when the gate opens, you don't have time to talk yourself into it and have that conversation about it. Your subconscious takes over when that gate opens, and if you're not 100% there, and so that for me, it was easy to say, all right, I don't want to ride on this bull. I'm done.
Yeah. So let me ask you about your husband. How long have you been together and where did you meet?
It, that's a nice story, actually. So at, we've been together 13 years, I think. We got married 2 years ago. He's wonderful. If he was here, I'd turn the camera around, but he's not.
Okay.
Um, we met because at the time, so that would have been 13 years ago, I was writing a blog as an ex-Jehovah's Witness and a gay guy for a website that is devoted to people who are trying to get out of the Jehovah's Witness. And I had, he has a cousin who is, and also grew up as a Jehovah's Witness. He has a bunch of Jehovah's Witnesses in his family. So he knows what the drama is. And that cousin he has who is gay goes through the typical Jehovah's Witness drama. You leave, your family cuts you off. After a few years, they will try to reconnect because they think they're going to pull you back in because they've reconnected. And then when they realize you're not coming back in, then they cut you off again. So my husband, his name is Curtis. He was just Googling. He wanted to know a little more about it. And he found my blog and didn't do anything about it. But he thought, well, this guy looks interesting, and didn't do anything about it. And I think a few months later, I had an ad or a personal ad on Match.com.
Okay.
And Curtis did not have an ad on Match.com, but he had gone there and looked. And of course, when you go look, they collect your email. And a couple months later, Match.com sent him my profile and said, here's somebody you might be interested in. And he's a bright guy. So he recognized, hey, that's that guy that wrote that blog that I looked at. So he said he spent a week hemming and hawing he didn't want to join Match.com to contact me. And he decided, all right, I know where his blog is. There's his email. I'm going to send him an email. So he sent me a really nice email. He apologized for, as he referred to it, kind of coming in through the back door instead
Yeah.
of Match.com. But it was the nicest email. And we had coffee a week later. I think coffee was at 10 o'clock in the morning. And it was just such a nice day. We spent the entire day together. And
Where was this? Where were you living then?
in the Bay Area, same
In the Bay Area,
place
okay.
where, yeah. Once I graduated from school at Pico State, and I came to the Bay Area to decide this is where I'm going to start my career. And
Yeah.
so we have 160 acres east of
Wow.
San Francisco on a farm. I spent this morning splitting firewood. We're surrounded by the Bay Area, but it doesn't feel like it. You wouldn't
Yeah.
know it. We're, rural guys. So I still hunt, and I 2 weeks ago, I was at my neighbor's house helping them with branding because they're branding calves. It's like my life hasn't really changed. I just found that it exists in the Bay Area. I can
Yeah.
be gay here. I don't,
Nobody cares there.
yeah. It's like, I mean, all these cowboys that I'm there at their branding, and I don't know if they know I'm gay. Some of them do, but I don't think anybody really cares.
Yeah.
That's just the nicest way to live without.
What do you think about Montana and Wyoming now? Do you think that people are more open to the LGBTQ community now, or do you think it's still taboo?
I think it has to be more open.
Yeah.
The world has changed. I think it might still be a difficult place to live,
Mhm.
especially, well, I don't know. I used to think that if you were gay in a way that everybody knew you were gay in the first 5 seconds of talking, you
Mhm.
would have it really difficult, as opposed to someone like me there, nobody would have guessed it. And it was an easy way to kind of slide under the radar.
Yeah.
And not get any grief over it. I hope things are different now. I don't think that people tend to flee
Yeah.
They might just for social reasons because they might be the only gay person,
Yeah.
and they might say, "All right, I'm getting out for that reason." But I don't know that it's a fear-driven get out before they get beaten.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I went to Montana for the first time maybe 2 years ago. Big Sky, I think is where we went.
Mhm.
We drove through Yellowstone, and
Yep.
me and my husband, we've been together for 26 years, and we did the whole drive from Salt Lake City up through there all the way up to Montana, and it was just kind of an amazing, beautiful
Yeah.
drive. And, we didn't feel uncomfortable and safe there at all. I mean, we were only there for a long weekend, but felt good.
Yeah. Yeah. I sure hope it's different than when I was there.
Yeah. And
People
what
have
is your
grown.
husband like? Is he into doing the same type of things you're doing? Like, where would he go hunting with you if you wanted to if you want to, or no?
Did a couple times. It's when we bought the property we're on now, which is where we think we're going to live forever. There's lots of turkeys out here. And the first year, I convinced him to shoot a turkey, and he did. And so I have a picture of him holding this great big gobbler, and then he said, "Okay, don't need to do that again." But
Okay.
has no desire. So I mean, even I just went out and killed rats in the chicken coop this morning that I had in the trap, and he saw them yesterday, and he won't go home.
Yeah.
And he tells me I need to go. Um, but just a nice fit.
Yeah. Good. Before we end the podcast, I want you to tell me a little bit about your new book that's coming out in a couple of months.
The new book, the title is The Gift. It's fiction. It began because I had so many, particularly book agents who were wanting me to write fiction.
Mhm.
And I started with it's similar to my memoir, but became very different. So it's basically a story of a single mom who has a son, moves into cowboy country in Northern California, raises him as a cowboy, not first life, but there is a rancher next door. He's just the most patient guy who takes over this young boy's life. And he does the same thing my father did, which is fall for the Jehovah's Witnesses. And and so she raises him in a very constrictive life. But he's growing up in a cowboy world where where at that time you certainly can't be gay. It's the same time that I was in.
Yeah.
But there's this really strong sense of self-determination in the cowboy world. You're responsible for where you go and how you do it. And he gets that. But he gets outed when he graduates from high school as being gay. And it's a for him, he can no longer live in that town. So that the rancher actually helps him find his way out. And for him, it's the similarity to my story is that his struggle is trying to figure out how can I possibly be gay? There's nobody like me.
Mhm.
He just doesn't see that. And so he's living in this really constrictive world. That's what he's been taught. But he finds his way out.
And does the man that kind of was he gay also? The man that you
No,
said that? No. Okay.
no, but he's a he's fictional, of course, but he's a wonderful man. He's a rancher with a really strong sense of independence
Awesome.
and the recognition that people just exist. That would be his phrase: is that people exist. You don't choose what you like. You should be happy in the way you live. And
Do you
and
have a
he,
release date?
yeah, February 25th.
February 25th. Okay, that's great.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much for being on. Your
you bet.
life, your memoir, I think is so interesting, and I'm so glad you got to share it. And I did some research on you before we had the conversation, and just I think it's so unique, and I love it that you had this aunt that kind of saved you in a lot of ways. So
Yep.
you're so fortunate for that. So
Yeah.
everybody go out and take a look at Scott's book that again was just republished, second run, Cowboys, Armageddon, and the Truth, How a Gay Child Was Saved from Religion. And his new book, The Gift, comes out on February 25th. And I'm assuming it'll be on Amazon and everywhere books are sold.
Yep. Yep. And any place you could buy books, it'll be there.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on,
You
Scott. I
bet.
appreciate it. You have a
Bet.
great story, and it was a pleasure to meet
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice talking with you. Have a good day.
Yeah. You too.